Well, thank you so much for letting me come and talk about the courses I've been teaching. And I noticed that throughout the last, pretty much since COVID, so about 5 years, we've been, and we, I mean, libraries of all types in general, have been under tremendous amounts of pressure from different agencies, people, pulling us in different directions, and none of it really is really about instruction. And so I thought, um, since I've been teaching some sort of information literacy class that is more geared to fake news, I thought I would share some of the things that I've been doing, and maybe it'll be helpful for other librarians. Um, oop, oop. Sorry. Okay, there we go. So just a little bit about me. My library degree is from University of Kentucky. I've been at Columbus State University, which is one of the schools in the Georgia State University system. This is my 10th year here. I've been a librarian going on 15 years, and wow, time flies. And up until like 2 months ago, um, the courses I was teaching was a 1 credit information literacy and critical analysis course, which is really their fancy way of saying um, a scheduled library instruction class. It's a 1 credit course for adult learners that are trying to finish their degree, and this is part of their degree path of, they might have started like 5 years ago and now they want to finish. So they created this degree path, an interdisciplinary degree path, so they can finish their degrees as quickly and as affordably as possible. And then we also had a perspectives block, which kind of was an elective block intended to for faculty to provide instruction about really any of the topics in more of a real world setting. And I named mine "That's Fake News" because that was the big slogan of the time I created the course. But 2 months ago, they CSU scrapped the perspectives unit, and now I'm in the middle of creating a course with the cybersecurity faculty, and they call them the river courses, which is they're restructuring how students take these real world skill classes. So it'll be a 3 credit class with more of a disinformation and cybersecurity approach, but really it's still a lot of the same stuff, just a different angle. And they kind of just sprung this on us, as soon as we got back from Christmas break. So all of my experience is in academic libraries, and I know some of the topics that I'll touch on today affect all libraries in multiple different facets, whether you're a librarian, if you're library staff, or, wherever you fall into that, work chart. We've all been kind of feeling that push and pull from lots of different people and agencies and things. And my interest has always really been in information literacy, but how to make it more interesting, because while I think these topics are fascinating, I realize that a lot of students often don't. So my focus is, trying to make information literacy more accessible to students, in the respect that, research doesn't have to be hard and boring and, a terrible experience. And I also wanted to incorporate my interests of disinformation and propaganda. So that's really how my fake news class came to be. So I just want to give a little background into how this all came together so this is our library, Schwab Memorial Library. And when I started teaching, this is at the beginning of my career at CSU, we were teaching a course titled Library Research Methods, and it was, a basic research course on how students can use the library resources. But on a uh, more substantial scale. So it was probably, like a one shot, but like a 2 credit course that, talked about everything much more in depthly than you would get in any type of one shot class that um, you would get going into somebody else's classroom. And we always applied this progression of finding and identifying information. And this is how I remember teaching information literacy in 2012, when it was a lot less complicated in how you present information literacy skills and what could be interpreted from it. And within my first course of LIBR, I really just touched on the databases and our library catalog and, catchy, acronyms so students could remember, the important parts of information. And the CRAP test, which I'm sure a lot of us even to this, still use. And it's great for, it still has its purposes, but I was starting to find as, time went on that it wasn't doing the job in terms of media and what students were seeing online, what they were seeing in terms of news and how that was kind of seeping into culture and, not just necessarily the national culture, but within our state and local areas. So I really wanted, when I started creating my fake news course, I also wanted to keep in mind that how things, and this is kind of looking back in hindsight, a lot of things that used to be complicated weren't complicated anymore, like graphic design. It was so easy now to make a graphic or a meme. You didn't need to know necessarily how to use Photoshop. So a lot of content we'd see online all of a sudden became a lot more believable because these tools were becoming very accessible and affordable. And I put this in here just as a throwback. I used to use this when I first started teaching in 2012 as, an example of a fake website. And I kind of long for simpler times, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever used this. So I just kind of wanted to give everybody a chuckle of what we used to use to show fake websites. And, you know, in creating the class, I really had to think about the way disinformation and fake news was being presented to um, to students. And, I realize that a lot of you might not be academic librarians, but I'm dealing with adults pretty much, with the exception of, a few dual enrollments that are, in high school. Um, so a lot of their habits are already ingrained. A lot of them are at the checkout counter, or were at the checkout counter, looking at tabloid headlines. And, when these tabloids were like really in their peak, everyone knew that they weren't real, or at least most people didn't. And so when I was creating fake news, when I was creating the fake news class, I wasn't creating fake news, but how do I combat so many different elements of disinformation and, deep fakes now and AI, that's a whole separate presentation. I think there might have been a couple today already, but this is really where it really began to change everything, when these started coming out in 2017, 2018, 2019, because now you couldn't trust your eyes. And these Obama, grid photos, these were I think these were probably 2018. I have all my link, this is if you want to see where these came from. Um, I mean, these were pretty good, and these are almost like 7, 8 years ago. So it's really, when I was putting this together, I was really kind of floored at how far this has come. Like we thought that, this grid, which I'm sure a lot of you have saw when it was first posted on how deep fakes were really starting to take, you know, take the news and disinformation world by storm. Now it's just kind of wild when you think about it. Um, but it was really when your fake news was the real punch in the gut of teaching information literacy and um, particularly in libraries. Um, and I don't think any of us could have really known how much that's fake news would, or your fake news would really be the beginning of something really kind of sinister towards libraries and teaching information literacy. But, you know, these are some of the, headlines of 2016 that obviously are fake, but people still looked at them and people were reading them. And, it becomes a very daunting task at this point to, and mind you, the politics of fake news isn't even really in its peak. So looking at all of those elements that we were being encompassed by, and we are encompassed by now, um, that's really where this course got its genesis. And I wanted to be able to teach library skills. I wanted to teach about fake news and disinformation and how, the information industry and to include social media really preys upon some of our basic human instincts to that makes it so believable, not even believable, but we want to believe it. So I started during COVID is when I really started developing the course. And even then, when I decided to call it That's Fake News, I was a little apprehensive about it. So I emailed my our dean of libraries and I asked him, is this like too provocative? And he's like, no, it sounds great. So I was like, well, if he says it's okay, then it's okay. So that was kind of the birth of That's Fake News. And I really wanted to call it something catchy. Some of the other courses that, I didn't have a say in the title of, library research methods and information literacy and critical analysis. I mean, yawn. So I really wanted something to be punchy, but also within the parameters. Because at this point in Georgia, within the USG system, some of our state senators wanted us to produce lists of courses that touched on anything that was related to, that talked about race, white men, Christianity, or all three. And that was when it really started to get stressful. Because how do you teach about disinformation and fake news? And how do you teach students to, think critically about the information they consume if you don't look into some of those topics, not necessarily white male Christianity, but like you look into the tough topics of bias, of, how those biases play on us and how they are used often on purpose to make us stay on social media platforms. So I was very intentional when I was planning this out. And I thought, okay, the state legislature is starting to turn up the heat on what they're considering appropriate, even with in adult learning. So I really made an intentional outline of what are the most important topics, what are the objectives, and I connected everything to those objectives. So if I was questioned or somebody got wind of my course in political power, I could say I'd have a map, an outline of that makes sense to anybody who is arguing in good faith on the purpose and educational benefit of my course. And how I present, I really had to look at the timeline and calendar of it all. And that was a lot harder than I thought it would be, because how do you talk about bias, and should you talk about bias before you talk about the business of social media, and where does journalism come in? So really I really had a lot of intentional, thoughtful planning that I might have put too much time into, but I felt it was important just because of the political climate that was starting to warm up, but also to help me really see, what makes the most sense and how students might absorb this information, because you really kind of have to jump around a bit. So this was my general topic line that I identified as the most important topics. And I tried to find a title for them that wasn't just Module 1, Module 2, or, the bullet points here that, are for, everybody to just, get a quick overview as I talk, but, kind of hook students into what we're really going to be learning about in that particular week. Like I said, I initially started this class face-to-face, but then I moved it online because when it's face-to-face, students ended up watching me click a lot on a projector, and I felt like it was probably be more beneficial for them to, if it was an online course where they're kind of looking at it and clicking on their own. And so I ended up changing it, but the initial course was face-to-face. So these are some of the headlines of the time, and as we go into 2025. But it wasn't even just what Georgia, the state, was really doing within the legislature. Florida was having a huge impact on other states. And within higher ed, you really see these headlines of an attack on higher education in itself, not even just about disinformation, bias, fake news, and the critical race theory, I guess, for lack of attacks that higher ed was getting. It made me nervous. And so, but I also wasn't really, I had to balance a lot of what I was seeing, my own discomfort, and what I saw in the media, and what Georgia was doing in terms of cutting funding, our legislature making threats about, this or that, making this illegal, that illegal. And then, indoctrination became a big buzzword. I know all around a lot of states, that particularly in the K-12 atmosphere. But believe it or not, in higher ed, it was, if you're not in higher ed, you'd be surprised how many times I would hear in some capacity about, we don't want to indoctrinate anybody. So I really, how do you talk about fake news and bias without kind of sounding like it's indoctrination. And I didn't want to be, not just because of you know, uh, consequences from a politician, but I don't want anybody feeling like I'm pushing my opinion on them. I just want to teach them how to find quality information and that is authoritative and appropriate for whatever a research question a student has. And really, that's the goal of a lot of instruction librarians. You want to teach them how to find authoritative, current information that answers their questions that they have about whatever it might be. So here's a little summary of my plan of attack and addressing some of the concerns and challenges that I had that, and you're probably thinking in your own heads, oof, that's a tough talk. How do you touch on that? Bias was the big one because I started hearing in other states, in Florida, Tennessee, Alabama, really all the states that surround Georgia, about how they did not want to see anything, the legislatures did not want to see anything in curriculum, often in K-12 and higher ed, anything that touched on bias. And so I looked at it and said, but we all have bias. And so I tried to present it in making it abundantly clear in my course that you're not a bad person if we all have bias. You're not a human being if you don't have some biases, because we all have different life experiences and we grow up differently. And so I didn't single any one group or news organization or person or anything like that out. I tried to be as bland and indirect as possible when talking about certain biases, but I also connected it to why we need to know about this, because if you don't understand bias, then you can't possibly understand, make the connection of why we're prone to believing fake news. And that's the whole point of the class. That's what students are paying to take this class for. They want to learn about fake news. So I did this in, relevant and unconventional ways. So I tried to keep most biases strictly to the media. So going over confirmation biases or reaction bias or, and I tried to I found these great cartoons that kind of, illustrate the biases. So it keeps it accurate, but also has a bit of, there isn't heaviness to it that people can kind of feel when you go into these types of topics. And then I had this assignment called In One Word, and I gave a very intentionally worded biography about myself, and I put parts of my life that that I could point out afterwards that where biases could be had. So for example, I married a soldier. I wasn't the soldier, but I put it in a way where I could be the soldier. Maybe I was the soldier, and that's why I moved. So at the end of my bio, I tell students in one word, what do you think of me? And, it's anonymous, my feelings won't be hurt, just what do you think of me? And it's worth like 15 points, and, it's easy points. And there, there's no tricking them. I'm not trying to, trick you or anything, and it's kind of, students have fun with it. And I create a big word cloud from those entries. And really the point of it is it doesn't matter what you think of me, because you only know I gave you very specific information that I wanted you to know. So there's your bias, and students are, go, oh man, they, not that they feel tricked, but, they kind of see what I'm talking about when I say we all have a bias. Some people thought I was nice. Some people thought I was quiet. Some people, so it was just, and it's kind of interesting to see how they describe you in one word. So when you make yourself part of the tough topic, it takes a little bit of the tension out. And if the legislature was gonna get upset about anything, I'm putting the discomfort on me versus students being reflective of themselves. And, when I say that, I just mean in this particular case. Obviously, we want students to be reflective on themselves, but when it comes to tough topics and you don't know how to navigate them, this is how I tried, because I wasn't really even sure how to handle these types of things. So, and then show, don't tell. These are just a couple of, examples of different types of biases and perspectives on how, often we are so focused on one. The monkey business illusion is basically you don't see the monkey that passes through the room. So just, activities like this or learning, different examples on how to present kind of tough topics without appearing, to have that bias that you might be nervous about portraying. And then I always tried to tie things back to professional organizations that we used. So like all sides. When I'm talking about media bias in class, this was the one I was most nervous about was how do you talk about organizations that are biased, but you don't ever because my biggest worry was that a student might complain that I said that this organization was X, Y, and Z. So what I did was I used all sides media bias chart and I created a randomizer of all of them. Oops, sorry, I thought but basically I use this to create a randomizer where students would click and it was a spinner wheel. And so I would ask them to pick a topic and spin the wheel 3 times. And that way they were looking at 3 different news sources that were likely all of a different political leaning, and they could give me their thoughts. And then I would present the journalistic integrity. What makes good journalism good journalism? So if they decided that a news organization was really biased or they felt it was counterfactual, they came to that conclusion on their own. I just gave them the tools of what makes good journalism good journalism. And then when talking about, where to find unbiased or with information related to government and elections, sources like Ballotpedia often have a really great track rating on how to talk, not just to how to talk about these things, but where students can find what something is. It's basically in its name, it's an encyclopedia about elections. So if they, if they want to, or you're talking about something that's kind of election related, this is a great way to send students to look at topics that are just bland. It's bland. It's not bland in its boring, but it's just very, as a matter of fact, I guess is a better word. And then showing them, students, why these types of sources can be trusted, and talking about transparency and showing them why you selected these sources as or tools to use. And this is particularly helpful when you're talking about statistics. And I have a unit on like surveys and looking at, experts and why we should or should be wary of, a study that comes out. How do we know how that 67% of people do this because of that? Where does that 67% come from? So kind of showing them why um, sources can be trusted. So basically for anything that I was I had apprehensions about when it came to bias or topics that, dribbled into politics, but, not that obviously I wasn't talking about politics, but, a lot of education now is political, whether we want it to be or not. So, um, I'll make my slides available later, but these are the randomizer links, and there's a randomizer for conspiracy theories too. So when we talked about conspiracy theories, I didn't talk about real ones. I had them make them up. And then, all right, so how do we create a conspiracy theory? So I had them construct their own conspiracy theory and who are the experts that we have to discredit. And, by kind of doing the reverse, it's kind of fun. They have a lot of fun with like looking into birds aren't real and those kinds of things. But, it's absurd, but it also shows how easy it is to make something up and how in, the real world, scientists are discredited and demonized all the time. Going forward, they have that in the back of their head. Well, if I can make it this easy, well, anybody could. So, um, it's, and it takes the pressure off of you that you're not touching on a subject that, um, is a hot button issue that might upset somebody regardless of how absurd we might think it is. And as I mentioned, I really try to, when it comes to journalism, I, talk about the ethics. The News Literacy Project has so many great resources and videos on really anything related to fake news, journalism, information literacy, the First Amendment. I use a lot of their content because don't reinvent the wheel. Just, there's so many great tools that all of us as librarians make. The News Literacy Project is kind of targeted more to K-12 and more, I would say more towards the, late elementary, middle school, early high school range, but I'm able to adapt a lot of their activities, to make them more appropriate for higher education. But you could easily take some of their activities and tone them down for younger students as well. And I try to gamify it because I really, like I mentioned, I think what I teach is fascinating, but I realize they often are not, as thrilled about it. So what I try to do is create a badge system. So when they turn in an assignment or complete a quiz, they get a badge, and then whoever has the most badges at the end of the class gets an automatic 100 on the final. So it's kind of a fierce competition. Like I didn't see that one coming, but it added a little bit of fun. And I try to incorporate, like, the seriousness of what fake news does while still keeping it lighthearted through memes and GIFs, because that's memes and, maybe not so much as GIFs, but memes that go back to like, ancient ancient Rome. So, they have a lot of fun with memes and those kinds of things. So, um, and it's a good way to talk about fast fact checking, and how viral media really becomes viral. When you get a good meme and it has a good catchphrase, sometimes it's like fire. So, um, I try to show them, you know, memes or GIFs and ask them, okay, is this real? So really quick, our latest challenge as academic libraries was Georgia SB 74, which intended to criminalize academic and public librarians. There was also another bill that tried to go through the legislature, was SB 127, which was attempting to ban DEI. And so, as libraries, we're challenged by a lot. And I know in Tennessee, there's a lot of legislation that's already passed, that they're trying to pass, that they haven't even conceived of. And it's tough when this is the guy, Max Burns was our latest proponent of criminalizing librarians. And it was done in completely bad faith because he has a PhD in economics. He has been a professor, a chair of his department, a dean, and he was the former president of Gordon State University, which is another university within our system. So these arguments aren't in good faith. So how do you handle the state when you feel like you're being set up to fail? And really look at the big picture. And where I kind of wanted to end was, look at your allies. Who are they? Are they, who in your library, your superiors and organizations that support libraries? When I wasn't sure if naming my course That's Fake News, I didn't mean this at the time, but I created a paper trail asking my boss if it was an appropriate title. And he said yes. So, you know, finding who the people that support you are. At CSU, we have a pretty good executive leadership, provost and president that are really committed to student learning and, don't really let the legislature, nonsense, really inundate us. And that's really helpful. But not all universities, not all K-12 schools have that. So, and also we had our State Library Association, which was amazing. They basically went to work and none of the library related legislation passed, but Mr. Burns said that he is going to be coming for us again, not literally, but they're going to try this. They try this every legislative session to criminalize us for the last 5 years. So, but they are really helpful, and that helps when you have a helpful support system. I collect data too. I collect pre and post test data. I try to get as much information from my students as I can, not necessarily with surveys outside of the pre and post course survey that I get, just to see where they are at the beginning of the course, and then see if they learned anything from the course. And I give them extra credit. It's a voluntary quiz that they get, extra points for. But I also make sure that I'm not necessarily creating a big literature review or anything like that, but I do, keep track, and I active eye out for literature that talks about teaching information literacy, because if you do face some political pressure, it's a lot harder for anyone to argue against you if your lesson plans and objectives are backed by solid methodologies and professional literature and within the standards of your profession. And then assessing your risk. So you have a job. We all have a job to do. And what's the level of risk that you're going to take to be the best at your job and do your job to the best of your professional abilities? And, the politics of education has really put a weight on us in that respect. So you do have to, put some risk in it. I'm well aware that if the wrong legislature, I'm not doing anything wrong, but I am also keenly aware that I might piss somebody off if they learn that there's a bias topic in my class. And that's the risk I'm willing to take because I'm here to teach information literacy, and that's part of information literacy. So, um, but nobody's asking, I don't think anybody should ever, you know, be the martyr of libraries, but, look at the risk, at what the worst possible scenario is for including something in your curriculum or your lesson plans or weekly module, and look at it from what's the worst that could happen. And a lot of times, even in these political times, the worst really isn't that bad. Particularly if, the research and the data is behind you. And if you've been collecting data that shows that students improve in your course, then, they can't really, it's hard to argue against it. So these are some of the references that I used, and I linked my link tree and my libguides that I created for That's Fake News. I realize you can't click that off of the screen, but I'll make my slides available. And thank you so much for giving me, the time to come and talk about this. And, I know we're all a little stressed out lately, but.
Does anybody have any questions for Alison? It was a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry if I was a little, I'm nervous.
No, you were fine. Yeah, see, Kelly, it was so good. You did so good. See, you even get the emphasis. It was all in capital letters. So you did great.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So are you ready to hear the final number?
Sure, yeah.
115.
Oh, wow. Thank you guys for taking the time. I know you're all busy and to listen to me talk about some things, so.
You have a question. Can you tell us more about the create your own conspiracy assignment?
Yeah, so basically I have them use the generator and it generates like the most absurd things, but basically, so let's pretend the birds aren't real was what generated. Basically, I tell them to think about it. You want people to believe that birds are not real. So we go over the parts of a conspiracy theory, discrediting experts and creating fear and polarize the topic. And so then after we go over the parts of the conspiracy theory, who are you going to discredit? Who is going to try to tell you birds are real and try to show data? And how do you polarize the topic that birds aren't real? If scientists and zookeepers and all these people are going to say, no, but look, these are birds. Okay, well, how do you discredit them? How do you say, no, they're spying on you? So, I forgot the name of it. Let me share the link in the chat. It's like a whole bunch of generators. Like what I really wanted to create was a generator that found articles, but that required coding and outside of my skill set. So what I ended up doing was, I entered the news organizations into the generator instead. So in my quest of finding that generator, I found generators for everything, like randomizers for and so it was just a random generator that I found, but it's in there's my presentation. So you can click on the conspiracy generator link. And that way, like, you're not touching on like vaccines or, COVID or, because I mean, when it comes to older students, like, I'm working with adults, if you tell them to pick a conspiracy theory, they're going to pick a real one a lot of times. They're not going to really go to the imaginative part. And that's where people start getting kind of antsy. So when you force them to pick up, pick a top, to talk about conspiracy theory, birds aren't real, but they get into it. Like I was really shocked. Like a lot of this, I just kind of, a lot of it was hit or miss. So, some things I thought would be a big hit weren't. The conspiracy theory generator, that was a big hit that I was surprised with, particularly because I'm dealing with adults and, adults, we can be like kind of, we don't have time for this, but they got into it. So
Allison, you have two other questions. Melissa has her hand up, and I have a question from previously in the chat. Melissa, give me just 1 second. Let me get this one first. I know this is for a several module course, but have you applied any of these to a one-shot or one-time workshop only? Like what points would you take out for those scenarios?
that's a tough one. I don't think with my one shots, typically, I know we're a mixed group of librarians here. When I'm doing a one shot, it's usually a very specific course for a very specific assignment. So a lot of times for the one shot, it's strictly library resources. And then I give them my LibGuide link. And actually I create a QR code because students, young adults to, college students love QR codes because then they don't have to like write it down. They can just like scan it. But I create like, a QR code for a slide presentation with, all the resources that I used and then, my LibGuide so that that corresponds to the subject area. And, that way they have, because you only have so much time, and I guess it depends on the topic of, what the one shot is, but what I take out is kind of just, not necessarily the fun parts, but like the fluff of it. So if I'm being asked to talk about conspiracy theories, I might just go into what makes a conspiracy theory. And then if I have enough time, let's do a generator as a class, like run the generator. All right, let's do do an overview instead of what I'm having them do as an assignment is like really looking for who's somebody you would discredit for the absurd thing the thing generated.
Very cool.
I hope that answers the question. I kind of went all over the place. But I was trying to come back to the
You're good. You're good. Awesome. Any other questions?